One second I was reaching for the phone on the kitchen counter, and the next second, the floor came up at me so fast, I didn't even have time to put my hands out. I heard it before I felt it. A crack, sharp and final, like a branch giving way in winter. Then the pain arrived, and it was the kind that doesn't let you breathe around it. I lay there on the linoleum in my kitchen in Barrie, staring up at the ceiling I'd painted myself 11 years ago, and I thought, this is bad. This is very, very bad. My son lived 20 minutes away. I know that because I used to drive it twice a week when his kids were small. I'd bring soup, I'd bring groceries, I'd stay and do the dishes, while my daughter-in-law put the children to bed. 20 minutes. That's nothing. That's 2 songs on the radio. I couldn't reach the phone. It had slid under the cabinet when I fell. I lay there for 43 minutes. I know because the clock on the microwave was directly in my sight line, before my neighbor Bea came to return a pie dish she'd borrowed and found me through the back screen door. She called the ambulance herself. She rode with me to Royal Victoria. She held my hand in the triage bay while the nurses asked me questions I couldn't concentrate on because the pain was making the edges of everything go white. At some point, someone asked for my emergency contact. I gave them my son's name. His number. I said he lives close. I said he'll come. He didn't come. I found out later, weeks later, when I was home and healing and finally had the steadiness to ask, that the hospital had called him 24 times. 24. The nurses documented it. His phone rang, and he did not pick up. They tried his wife's number, which I'd listed as secondary. She didn't answer either. I was in surgery for just over 2 hours. A partial hip replacement. I was 67 years old, and I went under general anesthetic with no one in that hospital who belonged to me. Just Bea, who had to leave at 7 to feed her cats and lock up her house, and who cried in the hallway before she went because she didn't want to go. She told me that part later. I think about it a lot. The first thing I remember after surgery was a nurse's face very close to mine, and she was saying my name softly, and I said, before anything else, "Did you reach my son?" Her face did something careful, controlled, the way a person's face goes when they are about to be kind to you about something hard. "We're still trying," she said. He called the next morning. 11 o'clock. I was sitting up in the hospital bed eating oatmeal that tasted like paste, and my phone lit up with his name, and for one long, stupid second I felt relieved. I thought, he was probably camping. He was probably somewhere without signal. There's a reasonable explanation, and here he is now, calling to say he's on his way. "Mom," he said. I just saw the missed calls. We were at a hockey tournament in Sudbury all weekend. I had the ringer off. I waited. "How are you doing? Are you okay?" I said. "I had surgery yesterday." A pause. "Oh, wow. Yeah, they left a voicemail. I heard it this morning. A hip thing? A hip thing. A partial hip replacements," I said. "I fell in the kitchen Friday evening. I was on the floor for 43 minutes before Bea found me." Another pause. Longer this time. "That's terrible, Mom. I'm really glad Bea was there." And then, "So they said you'll be in for a few days? Do you need us to pick anything up from the house? We can probably swing by on Tuesday." Tuesday. It was Sunday morning. I said I was fine. I said not to worry. I don't know why I said that. Habit, I suppose. 39 years of making things easier for other people. Bea came every day. She brought me a crossword book and a tin of shortbread, and she sat with me for 2 hours each visit, and on the third day she said very quietly, not looking at me, "Has he been in?" I said no. She nodded. She kept her eyes on her hands. My son came on day 4, the afternoon before I was discharged. He brought my daughter-in-law and the 2 kids, and it was all very cheerful and quick. My grandson was on his tablet the whole time. My daughter-in-law stood near the door in her coat, like she was ready to leave as soon as she'd arrived. My son sat in the chair beside the bed and said all the right things. "You look good, they taking care of you, great that it went well." And at no point did he say, "I'm sorry I didn't come. I'm sorry you were alone. I'm sorry you went into surgery not knowing if anyone who loved you was on the other side of it." He didn't say any of that. I didn't bring it up. Not then. What I did lying in that hospital bed the night before I went home was open Instagram on my phone. I'm not entirely sure why. Some instinct. Some quiet pull I didn't examine too closely. My daughter-in-law had an account I'd looked at before, mostly photos of the kids and recipes she'd saved. I found it. I scrolled back to the weekend. Friday evening, the evening I fell, the evening the hospital started calling, she had posted a photo. A rink. My grandson in hockey gear grinning wide, medal around his neck. The caption said, "This kid, so proud, 53 likes." Saturday while I was in surgery. A photo of a restaurant table, ribs and Caesar salad and a pitcher of beer. The caption said, "Best meal after a long drive. Love Sudbury weekends." And Sunday morning, around the time my son was calling me to ask how I was doing, there was a selfie. The two of them, my son and his wife, in what looked like a hotel lobby. They were laughing about something. She had a coffee cup in both hands. The caption said, "Recharged and heading home. No obligations. Just us this weekend. No obligations." I read that 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the blanket and I stared at the ceiling for a very long time. I want to be fair. I've spent a lot of time trying to be fair about this, turning it over, looking for the version of events where it makes sense. They didn't know it was serious, not at first. The ringer was off. They were with the kids. These things happen. But 24 calls. 2 phone numbers. A voicemail that said your mother is in... And the response was a Caesar salad and a selfie captioned "No obligations." I went home Tuesday. Bea drove me. She'd already been in and stocked my fridge. Milk, soup, bread, some of those mandarin oranges I like. She'd put a plastic chair in my shower so I could sit. She'd moved the little rug by the back door that I'd apparently slipped on. Though I don't even remember that part of falling, just the floor arriving. She did all of that. She's 71 years old and she has bad knees and she did all of that. My son texted the day I got home. "Hope you're settling in okay." I didn't respond for 2 days. Not out of stubbornness exactly. More because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Every time I picked up caption, again. No obligations. And I put the phone back down. The first week home was hard. The physio had given me exercises and a schedule, and I followed it faithfully because there was nothing else to do. I lived alone. I'd lived alone since my husband passed 8 years ago, and I'd been fine with it, proud of it even, the way I'd kept the house running, and the garden going, and my own life ticking along without needing to be anyone's project. I had my routines. I had Bea next door and my friend Constance from church, and my Thursday morning walking group. Though I wouldn't be walking for a while, I managed. But that first week, the house felt different. The kitchen felt different. I'd sweep my eyes across that patch of linoleum where I'd fallen and something cold would move through me, and I'd think, "You lay here for 43 minutes and your son's ringer was off." I called my brother in Halifax. He's the only sibling I have left. He's 73 and retired and opinionated, and he has a way of getting to the center of a thing quickly. I told him the whole story. He listened without interrupting, which is unusual for him. When I finished, he said, "What are you going to do?" I said I didn't know. He said, "You have an appointment with Howard next month, don't you?" Howard is my estate lawyer. I'd updated my will 2 years ago after my husband died, left everything more or less to my son. The house, the savings, the RRSPs, the investment account my husband and I had built slowly over 35 years of being careful with money. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe it's worth having a conversation," my brother said. I didn't answer him right away, but I didn't say no. My son called 3 weeks after I came home. By then I was moving better, getting around the kitchen without holding on to things, sleeping through the night. Bea and I had gotten into a routine of morning tea on her porch when the weather was decent, and those hours were the best part of my days. My son called on a Tuesday afternoon, I answered. He asked how I was doing. I said, "Fine." We talked for a few minutes about nothing much. The kids, a show he'd been watching, something about a road closure on his street, and then he said, very casually, almost as an afterthought, "Hey, I wanted to ask about the house." I know you've been thinking about whether it still makes sense for you, now that you know, with the hip and everything. Have you thought about what you want to do with it long term? I knew about the house. The property values in our neighborhood had gone up significantly. My house is paid off and it sits on a corner lot, and the last assessment was considerably higher than what we'd paid for it in 1991. My son mentioned the house a few times, in recent years, casually. Like this. I said, I haven't made any decisions. He said, we were thinking, if you did decide to sell, it might make sense to talk about the equity. Like as an early inheritance thing. The kids are at an age where that money would really, I said. I have an appointment with Howard next week. A pause. Oh, good, yeah. You should definitely keep that updated. Just, good to be prepared, I said. I agree. We hung up not long after that. I sat at my kitchen table for a while after that call, in the chair by the window that looks out at the back garden, the one where I can see the lilac bush my husband planted the year we moved in. The lilac was going to need pruning soon. I'd been thinking about that. I thought about my son's voice when he said early inheritance. How it had shifted slightly, gone a little warmer, a little more focused. Not the voice he used when he asked how I was sleeping. A different voice. The one he used when he wanted something. I thought about 24 calls. I thought about no obligations, just us. I went to see Howard the following Thursday. His office is downtown, on a street I've parked on hundreds of times, and I walked in and sat down across from him, and I told him what had happened. All of it. The fall, the surgery, the missed calls, the Instagram posts, the phone call about the house. Howard is a careful man. He doesn't react quickly to things. He listened with his hands folded on the desk and his face very still, and when I finished he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to change the beneficiaries." He nodded slowly. "To whom?" I told him. "My brother in Halifax. A portion to Bea because she is 71 with bad knees and no family close by. And what she did for me in those weeks mattered more than I can properly explain. A smaller portion to my church, which has a meal program for seniors that my friend Constance runs on Tuesday evenings. And a fund. Howard helped me structure this for my grandchildren on how it could be used. Education, primarily. Education, primarily. Something that went directly to them, not through their parents. The house I decided to keep, for now. I wasn't ready to make that decision, but I made clear in the documents that it wasn't to be treated as an expectation or an inheritance to be negotiated in advance. Howard drafted everything. I signed on a Thursday afternoon in April, and then I drove myself home, which I hadn't been able to do the week before because my hip was still too unreliable for the pressure of the gas pedal. Small things matter. The first time you drive yourself again after something like that, it matters. I didn't tell my son. I didn't think I needed to. A will is a legal document. It exists for after. He didn't need to know the contents. He found out 6 weeks later. I still don't know exactly how, though I have some suspicions. I think he may have called Howard's office directly, fishing, and someone said something they shouldn't have. Or maybe it was something Howard's assistant said without realizing what she was confirming. Either way, he found out that the will had been amended. He didn't know the details, but he knew I'd been in. He called me on a Friday evening. The tone of his voice was one I hadn't heard in a long time, tight, controlled, but with something underneath it that wasn't quite controlled. He said he'd heard I'd been to the lawyers. He said he just wanted to understand what was going on. He said he hoped nothing had changed without them being part of the conversation. Without will, my assets, my decision. My will, my assets, my decision. Without them being part of it. I let him finish. Then I said, "The hospital called you 24 times. Silence. I was in surgery for 2 hours, I said. I went under alone. I woke up alone. Bea, my 71-year-old neighbor with bad knees, was the person who sat with me. She brought me shortbread. She moved the rug by my back door so I wouldn't fall again. She stocked my fridge before I came home." He started to say something about the hockey tournament, about the ringer, about not knowing it was serious. I let him talk. When he stopped, I said, "You posted about a restaurant meal while I was in surgery. Your wife posted about having no obligations." A long silence. "Mom," he said, and his voice had changed now, gone softer in a way that I recognized, and that I also recognized I was no longer moved by. "I feel terrible about what happened. We've talked about it, she and we both feel terrible. It was a failure on our part, and I own that." He said he owned it. I noted the phrasing. "I accept that," I said, "and I've made decisions about my affairs that reflect what I've learned about who I can rely on. I'm not asking you to agree with those decisions." He said, "Can we at least sit down and talk about this?" I said, "We're talking now." We spoke for another 20 minutes. He made several points. Some of them were reasonable. He said he wanted to do better, wanted to be more present, wanted to be the son I needed. I believe that he meant it in the way that people mean things in the middle of a difficult phone call. Whether he would mean it next month, next year, in the next crisis, that I didn't know. I'd stopped being certain about that. Before we hung up, I said, "I don't want you to think this is punishment. It isn't. I'm not trying to hurt you." He said, "What is it then?" I thought about that honestly. "It's clarity," I said. "I got clarity about who was there, and I made decisions accordingly. That's not cruelty. That's just paying attention." He didn't have a response to that. We still talk. He still calls, more often now, and the calls are different. Less breezy, more careful. He asks different kinds of questions. Whether that's genuine or strategic, I'm honestly not sure, and I've made my peace with not being sure. I watch rather than decide. I pay attention the way I should have paid attention for years. My daughter-in-law sent me a card in May. It was a birthday card, though my birthday isn't until August. Inside, in her handwriting, she wrote, "I'm sorry we weren't there. We should have been. Nothing else. No explanation, no context. Just that." I put it on the mantel. I don't know what to do with it yet. Maybe I don't need to do anything with it. Maybe it's enough that she wrote it. Bia came for tea last Sunday, and we sat in the garden because the weather has finally turned, and we talked about her sister in Truro and the tomatoes she's starting from seed, and whether the squirrels will get into them again this summer. It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon. The lilac was blooming. The hip aches in certain weather, but it holds me up. I've stopped waiting for an apology that comes with a full accounting. One that explains and understands and promises the right things. I've learned that sometimes what you get is a card in May with 6 words and bad timing, and you have to decide whether that's enough to do something with, or whether it's just a card. What I know now that I didn't know before I fell. The people who show up are not always the people whose names are on the paperwork. Bia wasn't in my will. She wasn't even in my phone's contacts under emergency. She was just my neighbor, the one who borrowed my pie dishes and kept odd hours and knocked on the door with homemade soup when my husband died. She was the one who was there. I spent a lot of years organizing my love around obligation and blood, and the assumption that family meant showing up. It doesn't necessarily. It can. But it doesn't on its own, just by being family. I grieve that. I do. I grieve the version of my son I thought I had, the one who would have come without being asked, the one who would have heard 24 missed calls and driven through the night. That son exists somewhere in my memory of who I thought I was raising, and I love him still. I just can't make decisions based on him anymore. I have to make them based on what actually happened. If you're listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, the way you keep excusing it, the way you keep adjusting what you need to fit what they're willing to give, I want to say something to you directly. The people who will come when you fall are already in your life. You know who they are. They're the ones who return your pie dishes and knock on your screen and knock on your screen's door and ride in the ambulance without being asked. It's not too late to recognize them. It's not too late to act accordingly. I'm still here. I'm still in my house, with my garden and my lilac and my neighbor who has bad knees and a very good heart. I drive myself to appointments now. I'm starting the physio exercises I skipped all winter. The hip holds. I'm paying attention to what holds.